Alright everyone, so I'm going to talk a little bit about the SPSS and how it works and just kind of give you a quick introduction to it. The purpose behind this is to kind of, it's just to show you what you're looking at and so that you're not too fearful of what's coming. And there's a lot of little tricky parts to SPSS that initially can get you overwhelmed. I think it's a good way to express it. And again, it's not a personal thing. It's just one of those things that just happens. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and open up the program. I don't necessarily have to open it up first. By this point, you should have the program. If you don't, you're going to need a copy of it. I'm going to X out of this right here. And I'm sorry that the screen isn't 100% visible. Maybe this will help out a little bit. I'm trying to use this program, and so it's just takes a little bit of time to kind of, so there we go. Now it looks like it's the whole entire screen. So you see here what we have here. If I go to just kidding. So now if I go to the Play-Doh web page and I scroll down, too much stuff. This is what you guys are seeing right now. And I click on sample data sets, and I click here, new data iPumps 2016. It's going to say, okay, open. And I click on open. It's going to do the following. Give it a few seconds because it takes a while to download. It might take you a very long time to download, but here we go. And slowly, surely, you got it. There it is. All right, so this is what you should be looking at, and basically it's the iPumps data set for 2016, and it includes just I believe it's a sample, so it's not a full data set, but we'll work with what I have here. Alright, so this is what we have here. And so what you have is the variables and all these other things, and this should work just fine. To weight cases, you click on data, weight cases, get that radio button there. And then the weight that I want you guys to use is person weight, which is listed here as person weight. You highlight it, and then you can bring it over, or you can grab it and then bring it over. Like, for example, if you put your mouse over it and then hold it and then you move the mouse around, you can see how you can move it around. I can put it back, I can bring it here. So then you click OK, and boom, the data has now been weighted. So again, I like to operate from the data screen. So this is the data screen right here. This is where the data is located, and I like to operate from this screen because it assures that I'm working with the data set that I'm supposed to be working on. If I switch screens, for example, if I go over to the either the output or anything else, and I start doing analysis from here, it may not use the data set that I want to use. It may use, if I have multiple data sets opened up or multiple SPSS windows opened up with multiple data sets, it might look and do analysis on the wrong data set. So you got to be very specific and very careful with this. So I always operate from the window that contains the data set that I'm interested in working on. So if you notice here, this variable here is household weight. There is a household variable and a household weight that you can use. However, we'll focus on the persons because we're looking at person level analysis, not household level analysis. So now that you kind of see how this works and you see how this opens up and you can see how the data set is, and you can look at the variables and of course the variable views, which I talked about before, and so on, now you should be able to start the process of identifying variables by following some of the examples that I laid out, right? So to give you an idea, if you go to Analyze, Descriptive, and you click on Frequencies, and if you take one of the variables, I'm going to take the variable city, and you bring it over, and you click OK. Now I have a frequency of all the cities, and this is in my output page. I have a frequencies of all the cities in this data set, right? And then the number, the percentage in the of number of people in each one of these cities, right? Non-identified group is the majority at 86.2%, but you can see here how the different cities will have different percentages of people in there. New York 2.7, which is pretty high if you look at the percentage of everybody else. More importantly, it gives you an idea of the categories that are within the variables. So remember, I'm showing you the variables, and I want you to think about what these variables mean. The variables have, if you look at, particularly if you're looking at the level of measurement for the variables, notice that we're talking about nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio level variables. The level of measurement for the variable determines the type of analysis that you're going to perform on these, on the research that you're doing, right? The question that you're trying to ask. You need to know that level of measurement. And you need to identify the level of measurement for each variable. So two things that you now have to be working on. One is understanding what the dependent and the independent variables are. Dependent, independent, right? That's already been part of this whole process, right? The independent variable is the variable that affects the dependent variable, right? The dependent variable changes because of what the independent variable does. So, for example, your education level will have an effect on your income. Now, for most people, right? Traditionally, your education level will have an effect on your income. If you think about different levels and different types of variables, now you're talking about which is the independent, which is the dependent. So the independent variable in this case is your education level, and your income is your dependent variable. Income being dependent on your education level. Now, how you record education is important. So now that you've identified education as your independent variable, well, what's the level of measurement for that variable? Now it's nominal, ordinal, interval, and ratio, and there's certain properties that belong to each one. Depending on how education is recorded, determines the level of measurement for that variable. So let's say education is recorded in years. So you have a 12-year education. Well, a 12-year education, and everybody else is recorded by year, means that you're dealing with an interval level measure. So education would be an interval level variable. But let's say that instead of recording education by years, instead we're recording education by, if you're talking about, right, primary school, secondary school, and post-secondary school, right? Now what we have is a grouping, right? Because we know that post-secondary school is above secondary school and that secondary school is above primary school, primary, of course, being your typical, first to about, 8th grade, and then secondary being your high school years, right? Post-secondary meaning college. So we know the order in which they're in. We know that the higher you have, the more income you'll have, if we stick to our dynamic. So if we think about it in that way, however, because we can't tell the precise positioning of anybody within the different categories, so just because we say someone has a primary education and someone has a secondary education, you don't know by how much, right? Someone just had primary school, maybe they went up to 8th grade, but the person who has secondary education, well, maybe they just went only up to 9th grade, right? That makes it only 1 year apart. However, that maybe I'm talking about someone who had a 5th grade education and then someone who has a high school diploma. Well, now we're looking at the difference between someone who was in primary school in 6th grade and someone who has, a 12th grade education, which is a 6-year difference. So because we don't know the precise number between them, but we know one is greater than the other, then we know it's ordinal. Right? And so this is how we think about the level of measurement. Income, again, if it's measured in dollars, like specific dollars, then it's an interval level variable. If income is measured in groupings, the person makes between $10,000 and $19,999 a year. The person makes between $20,000 and $29,999 a year. Then we don't know precisely where the person actually is, but we know, right, that someone who makes within that second category, the 20 to 29,999, makes more than the person who's in the category below them, between the 10,000 and the 19,999. Right, so we understand that that makes it a normal level variable. So two things to consider now when you talk about variables, right? The relationship that exists between the variables, right? Now causal relationship aside, right? We're talking about now the relationship that exists between independent, dependent, identifying those things, and then identifying the level of measurement for each of the variables. And I just showed you how to do the frequencies in there, so the assignment should be pretty straightforward in this case. I hope this was helpful. Try to keep this short and sweet and to the point and make it as precise as possible so it doesn't feel like an overwhelming task. And I think at about 11 minutes is about everything that we can do at this point. So good luck, everybody.